unnecessary. You can't tell me, Conrad, that the creative in WCW at that time, with Russo and Ferrara, who did a hell of a job in WWE without question. They just couldn't handle when SmackDown came around. They're going to write another show, do more work for the same money. And I understand their apprehension there. They got a nice deal at WCW, so off they went. But you can't convince me that angle with Ed Ferrara imitating me with the Bell's palsy, and then Dr. Death being there, and the same role he had in one of his last appearances in WWE as JR's bodyguard, wasn't personal. And I don't know how smart booking that really is. I know that Turner finally curtailed the Bell's palsy facet of the impersonation, but I always looked back at that as personal. I think that affected Doc and my relationship, because I'm sure that somebody probably said or could have said, well, JR could have saved you, Doc, if he'd wanted to. No, that's probably, I'm sure that was said, because they want to ingratiate themselves with him. So one way of doing it is to make me the bad guy again, and convince him that if JR had wanted you to stay, he's got a lot of influence with Vince. He's Vince's right-hand guy. He could have made that happen. Well, I couldn't make it happen. I tried to make it happen, but I thought that whole thing was very personal. And I still, I'm glad I made peace with Russo, and I made peace with Ed Ferrara over the years, because I realized, thanks to Jan again, you just can't bring those grudges with you, honey. You can't. You got to get rid of this hate and all this animosity. It's not good for you. It's not good for your health. And she was right. And I remember sitting here at home, here in this very house I'm sitting in now, here in Norman, and my phone rang, my home line rang, and she answered, and she said, it's Vince Russo. So I take the call, and we kind of cleared the air, and it was good to clear the air. But at that time, when he was Oklahoma, the Oklahoma thing was going on, I thought it was very hurtful. I thought it was very unproductive, and I could see no money in it. So all those issues gives me plenty of reasons not to go that route in creative.
Steve only stays in WCW a little over a month. Did he ever talk to you about his run here, why he left, or this infamous Oklahoma piece of business?
Well, he saw that he wasn't going to go anywhere. It was a gimmick. It was more directed to me than it was building him. And so he's got so much time left. There's only so many bumps in that bump card. So he decided to bolt. And I don't think he was ever totally comfortable with it. But, people ask this question all the time. Were you mad at Dr. Death for his role in WCW with Ferrara and Russo? No, he was booked. And this was his role. It's like filming a movie. Here's the movie. Here's your script. Here's your role. Here's what you're going to do. So if you accept the terms of the creative and accept our money, then this is what we're going to ask you to do. Doc needed money. He needed a payday. He's like a lot of guys. You hope that everybody saves money, and you understand that this thing's is going to go away somewhere along the way. The checks are going to stop coming. So that was kind of the deal. So I was never angry at Doc. Never had one bit of hostility or animosity toward him. I loved him, and I understood what he was doing. Did I like it? No. But all he was doing was running the plays that the coach called, and he was following instructions just like he was taught at OU. I don't want to run that play. I want to run another play. You just go to the line of scrimmage and block. You do your job. And of course, Cowboy was a good teacher as well in that regard. You do what the booker wants you to do to the best of your ability. If you can't handle it, then work yourself out of it. Give your notice, leave. So that was kind of the deal, but do your job while you're there. So I always looked at Doc in that regard, because I knew it was a personal shot at me, and it wasn't about Doc. And I think somewhere along the way, Doc realized that as well.
Let's talk a little bit about what he's doing after this. January 7th, 2000, he pops up in All Japan to defeat Bart Gunn, who's now wrestling as Mike Barton. This is interesting booking. We never really got to see it in the States, but Japan made it happen. Did you ever have any conversations with Steve about whether or not he had any animosity towards Mike?
Not a bit. He had no animosity. Again, you recruit real athletes, not bodybuilders. You recruit guys that are legit and don't just look good on an 8x10. So he knew the price of that. Hey, look, he's the same guy that had 108 stitches in his eye, right? He didn't ever hold any animosity toward Brad Armstrong, and he didn't hold any animosity toward Bart Gunn, as best of my knowledge. All Bart Gunn was doing was his job.
Yeah,
he was trying to win the goddamn fight, and along the way, Doc got hurt. So no, I don't think he ever had any animosity toward Mike Barton or Bart Gunn whatsoever. But it was made into a storyline angle, because this is the guy that crippled Doc to death, and he's out for revenge. A good old solid wrestling storyline was what it was. But Doc never had any issues with Bart whatsoever, and that I ever heard. He never spoke to me about it. He may have to the boys or having a beer or something. I don't have a clue. But to me, in the conversations that we had, he never held any animosity toward Bart for injuring Doc.
Let's talk a little bit about February 2nd, 2000. It's the last hurrah of sorts. Steve teams up with Big Van Vader to beat Kobashi and Akiyama for the tag titles in All Japan. What a team that must have been. Dr. Death and Vader, huh?
Oh, God, yeah. Lord, good Lord, what an attraction. Hey, watching their entrance is scary.
Yeah.
Can you imagine standing in the ring waiting on them? Both guys could be heavy-handed, especially Leon. And Doc was just going to maul you. He's going to make you do things that you never thought you were going to want to do, but you had no choice. He had that great amateur background, so he could destroy your vertical base whenever he wanted to. He could take you down whenever he wanted to. And of course, Leon was just a brute. 400-pound athletic son of a bitch. The most athletic super heavyweight I ever saw was Big Van Vader, without a doubt. For a 400-pound guy to do a moonsault and not kill somebody, pretty damn talented. So yeah, that was an interesting combination. But again, what good vision of putting two guys together but when put together, their individual discrepancies of wear and tear, age, et cetera, was kind of be covered or hidden, so to speak, because you're just so in awe of these two giant men moving around like smaller guys athletically, and that their work was absolutely you couldn't see through it. It didn't look like somebody playing the role of a wrestler. These guys were just being themselves, being badass, massive athletes that asked for no quarter and certainly gave none. So it was a good booking by Mr. Bob again.
Let's talk about May of 2003. On May 23rd, he beats Lance Storm on a house show, and the next night, Lance beats him. How does this come about, and why is it only 2 matches? It feels like maybe behind the scenes, you or somebody was campaigning for him to have another shot, and they give maybe a couple of tryout matches, and Vince still says no. Is that pretty much the gist of it?
Yeah, pretty much. Lance Storm is an amazingly talented guy, one of the best coaches and teachers in the game, and sad that he closed down his school, which I thought was one of the best schools in the country or anywhere. Considering he did it in Calgary, to that country, period. But you do things like that where you bring a guy in. I remember bringing Chris Benoit in for a tryout. I think we had him work with Owen, and Owen went over. And some of that is to see how the guy reacts when he's told he's going to lose. Some of it's to see how he's going to execute and to see if his ego's in check. And I think that was the issue there with Lance Storm and Doc. One night Doc's going to win. Now let's see how he does on the other side of the coin. How does he put somebody over? That type of logic. So that was the reason for the two, a win and a loss. How's his demeanor? How's his effort? Did he have the same effort winning or losing that he did winning? Those type things you measure. So I think that was part of the scenario there, Conrad, is that, I kept lobbying for Doc to get a shot because we needed quality talents. And again, he might not have been the main event guy, but he would help us on the card. Everybody can't, as I've said this before, everybody can't bat and line up 4th or 5th. Everybody's not a cleanup hitter. He was, but he still can contribute to the team effort. At least I thought so, but it didn't. It didn't. We didn't go back and revisit Doc, and that was. We tried. We certainly tried.
September of 2003, he finds out he's got cancer. He's got a stage 4 tumor growing in his throat, and he says all he knows to do is to start praying. When you first hear that your old friend has cancer, what's that got to be like from your perspective?
Heartbreaking. No different than, Conrad, if somebody told you that a family member had cancer. How would you react, type thing? Right. We know how you would react. You'd be upset. You'd cry. You'd try to, what could I have done to make his life better? All these things, because I genuinely cared for the guy. And that was the problem I had in that role as in the head of talent relations, is sometimes I built relationships that probably were borderlining too personal, because that's how I managed. I took an interest in the guys that would allow me to do so. And I was always in his life, and he was always in mine in the formative years. We talk about, he signed in 1981, right? I think it was 81 we said, 80 or 81 for OU. Well, in 1980, let's say for easy math, I was 28 years old. 28 years old. So I was young, and I was in his demo, and he was my guy. And we grew up together in the wrestling business at the hands and under the tutelage of Cowboy Bill Watts, Ernie Ladd, and several other guys that were influential in both our careers in that era. It broke my heart, and I just kept saying, well, he'll kick cancer's ass. There's no way that this is going to kill this guy. He's just not going to happen. But then I saw him not too long after that. He was in the MD Anderson Cancer Hospital in Houston. And OU played Texas A&M in College Station, which is an easy drive from Houston. So Doc was there with some people, I think maybe some family members, some friends, or people from the hospital to come to the game. We decided we're going to meet at a certain place to hug and talk and all that. And I must have walked by him like twice. I didn't recognize him because he was down to about 190, under 200. Somewhere in that neighborhood. He's 100 pounds down. It changes your looks immensely. And I didn't recognize him. So when I saw him with his big hug, and he had to hold his, he had an open wound there in his throat where they were doing the chemo and all that shit. He had a patch over his throat so he could, keep the debris or any other bad things out of that. But it affected, his voice was always gravelly, but he had to hold his, throat to talk, over the bandaged up throat to talk. It was heartbreaking. But here's what I remember about that. After the big hug, he hadn't lost all his strength. I can remember that. It was a good hug. We cried. And I'm sure people are saying, well, those two OU guys in those OU clothes, what are they crying about? We ain't beat their ass yet. But we cried and we hugged, and all I can remember of that meeting, Conrad, was how much he laughed. We'd tell a story, I'd tell a story, and he loved my stories. He'd laugh, had fun, talking about our trials and tribulations with the big cowboy and all those things. But he laughed. In the face of death, he laughed.
What year do you think that would have been?
Oh God, it was right along this 2000, in the 2003 or 4. Not long after he got diagnosed. Well, probably 4, because he'd already started taking the chemo.
Yeah,
and that was wrecking his ass. It was bad.
He undergoes surgery for throat cancer in 2004. They have to cut his vocal cords. They take his thyroid out. They cut a nerve to his deltoid. For 3 months after surgery, he doesn't have a voice. He can't talk. He doesn't know what to do except reach for God more and more every day and pray a little more every day. And one morning he's awoken because he's bleeding from his neck, and he finds out that, hey, I'm in trouble. So he jumps in his truck, drives 4 hours, 100 miles an hour, all the way to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And when he gets there, the doctors are curious. Hey, how in the world did you do this? And he points up to the ceiling and then writes down the word God because he still can't talk. And a pastor walks by and they say the Lord's Prayer.